discussion over whether Counter-Strike Global Offensive needed its own The International, mainly because the game obviously is also by Valve, the same publisher of Dota 2, has been something which has been brought up again and again throughout the game's history, not least of all because CSGO obviously came out after Dota 2 did, and so the International was already very much established. Meanwhile, CSGO in the past used to have a much smaller tournament circuit, and so actually at the time, even the concept that it could have one was kind of a crazy one. No one thought Valve would waste like $1 million first place on a game like CSGO back in 2012 or 2013 when the game was very, very small. So, for anyone who doesn't know, the International is the name of a huge tournament held yearly in Dota 2, and it's essentially the World Championship of that game, and some notable features of it over the last few years are that it's crowd-funded, fans get to contribute towards the prize pool by buying compendiums, and it lasts about 2 weeks. And interestingly enough, it used to be the de facto the event for Dota 2 for a number of years. It began in 2011, and we're on to the 6th one right now. It's taking place right this moment, actually, in Seattle. And so at the time of the first sort of 2 or so years, there was nothing even comparable to the International in Dota 2. It's true. It was the event. It had like $1 million for first place. It was the one that everyone was trying to qualify for as a result. All the rest of the year was building up to that. Roster moves, other tournaments were about figuring out your roster for the International. But it's actually a kind of a misconception, a general stereotype, which funnily enough, even some Dota 2 pros attempted to reinforce themselves over the last few years, that Dota 2 is still just about the International. That the other tournaments don't matter somehow. They're all just a build-up still, and they don't get matter. Because, first of all, that wasn't the case for 2014, 2015. These years already had tons of tournaments in them, very competitive tournaments with the best teams in the world. If you're winning those other tournaments, it did mean something. If some team had fluked in International, which thankfully has very rarely ever happened, then you wouldn't be in a position, in fact, you could really say it hasn't actually, if you look in history. You wouldn't have said, oh, well, that makes them automatically better than a team that won 5 events at the beginning of the year of incredibly dominant fashion. So in general, it's never been the case, aside from the first few years, that the International was it for Dota. But it's definitely not the case now, because actually last year, they began a system in Dota 2 where they took from CSGO. Dota 2 got its own majors as well as the International. So it had 3 majors within that cycle up to this International. Now it has an International, so essentially 4 major World Championship type level events, except they don't count the others as World Championships because of the existence of the International. And next year, we've been told there will be 2 majors and the International. Now, what's interesting about this topic and why I brought that up, the context of where Dota 2 is because that really informs how I think about CSGO and the concept of having the International for CSGO, whether it be the same event or our own. I mean, maybe call it something different. I think someone said to call it something like the Global or something, which, yeah, that's quite a cool name. Would be a different look for it. Now, the main thing for me about the International is I feel like it's just unnecessary in CSGO. I mean, in CSGO, our system for every year so far, obviously the first one, we only got the first major at the end of 2013, but for every other year, we've had 3 majors each year. And each major is our equivalent to an International. Sure, the prize purse isn't as big, it's not as long, etc. But these are essentially the World Championship. We just get to have 3 World Championships in a year. I think that's why you see Dota 2 actually is taken from CSGO. They've put other big events that are majors into their system instead of having it as just the one World Championship. So I think one or the other is obviously a win for the majors. If I had a choice between just the International or just the 3 majors, I'd go with the 3 majors, because to me that's like having 3 mini Internationals. So I think it's a better system. Now, I also think that the whole hype aspect of the International, like building into one event, is actually really overplayed. Like, first of all, I think the hype is quite similar when you have 3 majors. If you spread them out properly and the tournament build-up in terms of the events coming into it is correct, I think you get essentially, you hit almost the same threshold of hype and excitement for those majors. It's just that actually, because you have 3 of them, you don't get caught in a position where an International comes along and it's a bit lackluster and it's not really that sick. Like, a lot of people criticize TI4 for not being that exciting overall, unless you were a huge fan of Chinese Dota. And at that time, actually, Meta wasn't exactly the most exciting to watch necessarily. So instead of that, you have 3 cracks at it instead of just having to get it all done in one. Also, I actually like the fact that having 3 majors instead of International means that you get to have proper champions. As in, if you were the best team for the first few months of the year and there's a major right then, if you win it, you get a chance to be like, yeah, I was the world champion at that point in time. I've like cemented my legacy. You never get this League of Legends or Dota 2 type nightmare where you can be the best team early in the year. So actually for TI4 2014, you look and you see that actually Team DK famously were gods early in the year. But by the time the International rolled around, they weren't, and they didn't manage to win the event. Then you look, for example, in League of Legends is the most famous example, where every team who's ever been a god in the spring, in general, never won by the time the World Championship came in League of Legends. The only time it ever happened was actually SK Telecom last year, and even then you could make a case that they weren't the gods because they lost MSI, but they did win the at least the domestic split of Korea and become in theory the best team in the world, and then go. But they also weren't dominant in the spring. But in general, you look at all the teams that were dominant in the spring of each year of League of Legends, they don't win the tournament, the World Championship, and as a result they're not remembered as the best team, even though for a while they might have been the best team longer than the team that won the tournament in the end, with the way that things sometimes play out. So I actually think it's better to have the 3 championships. It's more representative of who was the best at a particular point in time. You get to have 3 proper world champions for me. I also think that the only reason it would make sense to have an international is either A, on top of the majors, if they can figure that out, like they did with Dota 2, fair enough, or B, if they have an international and it means Valve themselves are going to pump up the prize pool themselves. If they're going to put in 3 to 4 times the prize pool of the current majors, go ahead then. Who would turn down another tournament that has fantastic prize pool? Or if they upgrade one of the majors to international status, I also don't mind that. I just personally don't like it myself, because as someone who loves the history of the game, I don't think that winning one arbitrarily assigned tournament towards the end of the year makes you the best team for that year, which unfortunately is the way people will remember it and people will think of that year, and the most casual viewer will take away that notion from the game. Whereas I think 3 majors spread out gives you a much, even as a casual fan, gives you a much better sense of who the best were. Also, you have the proper storylines leading into each major, not just the final major. So if a team were fantastic early on and had a great battle, they don't have to maintain it 6 months to have that storyline be relevant. It can be relevant for the first major of the year or the second major of the year. They can pick it up. A team does badly in the first major, but then they get things together. They make a key roster move. They get things together for the second major. Here we go. You also wouldn't end up with the scenario like we currently have in Dota 2, famously, where teams wait until almost the last day of the roster lock and make all these emergency transfers because they're just trying to play to win that major, trying to play to win the international. In general, in CS, we've never had that problem, because even when we have the majors, we have a much more open system because we have a 3 out of 5 spot system, and we have more tournaments overall, and we had the 3 majors spread out, which in the past Dota didn't have until 2015. So I actually think CSGO had the superior format to Dota 2 and every other game in the entire world of esports as far as I'm concerned. So I don't think it's good to necessarily go towards it just because it's cool in the international. Now, there are some features which are associated with the international, which are not the international themselves, as in we don't have to take a major and make it the international or add in the international to CSGO, which I would like to take from the international. I think they're fantastic features that are better than anything we've got in CSGO and any other game currently. So first and foremost, crowdfunding. I think that's fantastic the way they do it in Dota. They just had another almost $20 million prize pot over there for the whole tournament. Think about it. Our majors are $1 million for the entire major. They got 20 million just for the international this year. Their majors in Dota 2 were $3 million each, prize pool. Then you add in the fact that you have last year's international was 18 million or something for the prize pool. So this is fantastic. And I know that CSGO fans, I don't know how much they do it now. I still think it'd be very much. But I know last year, if you'd let fans contribute, they would have pumped these prize pools up. Hey, maybe not to 20 million, but we might have had majors of 5 million though. I think that really could have happened. Now, in turn, people will always bring up the sustainability argument there. But the problem is the scale of those numbers makes the sustainability argument a joke. Because who cares about if you can have 10 internationals in a row that are each $2 million, so I'm thinking of the League of Legends approach here, if you can have 2 that were 20 million each and thus were 40 million. Do you understand mathematics? One is 20 million spread out over 10 years, and the other is 40 million over 2 years, and that's if the others made 0 each. They're not going to. The other one might make 9 million, then the other one might make 4 million. So the sustainability argument doesn't even hold any water with the current if either or option that we're given from the tournament organizer giving it all, or the crowdfunding aspect. So that's irrelevant. Secondly, the sustainability argument is also very naive because it assumes that the game is going to not only last a long time, but with their model can gradually be sustained and then gradually increase and then over 20, 30 years we exist here. Never happened in esports. Never been a game that managed that. Never been anything that was close to that sort of sustainability or gradual growth or overall trajectory of growth. Therefore, if you can get it all now, get it all now. That's the only thing. It isn't either or in that scenario. It is only, do you get it all now or do you not get it all now? In 5 years when League wouldn't be able to be crowdfunded, did you miss your opportunity to do so? So in CSGO, I think that would be an issue. We're going to strike while the iron's hot here. But I think it's even an issue in all other games. And Dota 2, as far as I'm concerned, is the only one that's done a good job in this sense. I also think that these fans that we have in CSGO would blow the roof off CSGO. We would have huge tournaments. I mean, and especially now there's no gambling thing, let's make another way for people to get involved with their money in these tournaments and make them even sicker. I also really love how long the Dota 2 majors and the international are. The international runs for about 2 weeks. And that 2 weeks allows you so many opportunities to do different things with not only the format, but with the features and the content that you do there. Interviews, spread out the schedule so people are playing one key match per day when it comes to the big playoff series. They're not playing multiple matches in a day, or they're not having to come back the very next morning and play a match after they played late at the end of the other night. All these problems you can counteract by having this spread out format. And as a result of it being a few weeks long, it becomes like a festival of the game. It's not just about going and winning the tournament. You go, and then when you're not there, you do interviews with fans, and you do interviews with sites rather, you do interact with fans. Even if you go out last place, you watch the rest of the tournament. This is the event of the year. So I like that aspect to it, and I'd like that aspect to be in the CSGO majors. Also, when you have the 2-week format, you're allowed to have the excellent overall tournament format that they use, which I think is incredible. Because they have a group stage that's played out with all the teams there. And the group stage doesn't eliminate anyone from the tournament. All it decides is, do you go, if you finish in the top half of your group, except for that 1 year where this wasn't the case, you go straight into the upper bracket. It's a double elimination tournament. If you finish in the bottom half of your group, you go into the lower bracket. Upper bracket is best of 3. Lower bracket starts best of 1, but then it becomes best of 3 as you go on. So what happens is, it's double elimination, so you're not just going out in the group stage with one fluky result. If you do badly in the group stage, you can still earn your way back through. And every year, there are teams who come from the lower bracket and do big runs of 4 or 5 big wins and either get to the final or make it top 4, top 3. That wouldn't have done it. They would have come like 5th to 8th, or even worse, they would have got in the group stage in other tournament formats like we have in the majors at the moment. So I think this is a great format. I love it personally. I also love double elimination. It means that you can have a team play someone once, lose to them. This happened in the international last year. Evil Geniuses, the eventual champions, lost to CDEC, CDEC, whatever you want to call them, the Chinese team who'd come from the wildcard qualifier, and then played them in the final by coming from the lower bracket, and then beat them there, in part using what they'd learned from playing them the first time. You can add a strategical depth here. Imagine a team gets beaten by a Fnatic or something who plays a very skill-based style in CSGO, and then plays them again coming from the lower bracket or in the lower bracket, but now has figured something, little tweak out from how they played earlier in the tournament, and then beats them. What a great storyline this will be. What a fantastic way to approach the game. And if then Fnatic wins, to prove that you're really the true champions, which is way better than everyone else. I also love the fact that in the final, you can also then have a different format for the final. So having a double elim tournament, in the final, you can have that best of 5 final that we all want to see and would make it even more awesome. So I think there's certain aspects of the international that I'd love to see over in CS, but I think in terms of as an actual approach, I don't think it's necessary, and I think it's just taking something from another game, seeing something cool there, whereas actually I don't think it's needed. I think we've all got our own cool approach here that has its own pros if you think about it. I do think that in terms of how Valve approaches the majors, I think CSGO already had an advantage in terms of our major system over the international and over other games like League of Legends, StarCraft 2. So I think that Valve should think of that and should embrace unique, novel things that can exist in CSGO that can't exist in other games or don't exist in other games, rather than just looking to other games and trying to take things in from there.